Chapter 7, Restructuring the Tonal, Continued, Part 1. The Handling of Energy. According to Don Juan, all luminous beings are born with a finite amount of energy. The process of living slowly depletes this energy, to the point eventually where the luminous shell comes apart, and we die. Footnote 1. There is a detailed explanation of exactly how this process works, in keeping with the nature of sorcerers to seek explanations for whatever phenomena they observed, regardless of the seemingly outlandish nature of those phenomena. There is a force, at large in the world, that Don Juan referred to as the rolling force, or the tumbler. Continually this force rolls upon us, hitting us in the midsection, where there is a small gap in the luminous body. This process eventually, like water and wind wearing away a rock, widens the gap and eventually cracks the luminous shell completely open, resulting in death. Hastening this process is the slow but continual leakage of energy, caused by natural age but hastened by life habits that accelerate the process. These include habits injurious to the physical body, like smoking, but also habits that weaken the tonal, self-importance, self-pity, habitual negative interactions with other people, and countless other possibilities. When we say that the Nagual cleans and reorders the tonal of the apprentice, what he is really doing is identifying and stopping points of leakage. What the apprentice and the Nagual have over the average person is that they are double beings. That is, their luminous bodies are divided not into two compartments, as is normal, but into four. This endows the double being with more energy to start with, and enables that person to be stronger. Footnote 2. The word stronger applies to potential, not necessarily to reality. A double being has the potential to be physically and psychologically stronger than his or her peers, but if that potential isn't developed, the double being ends up no better off than the rest of us. Footnote 2a. Only a double being can become a Nagual, so both Nagual and apprentice are perforce double beings. How and why this is dictated, and a huge complication, will be discussed in future chapters. So, if our personal energy is finite and continually albeit slowly depleting, then slowing the rate of depletion quite literally results not only in a longer life, but a life with infinitely more possibilities than the life of an average person.
Part 2. Dealing with others and with daily life. 1. The universe is a predatory place. Don Juan explained to Carlos that the world we know is not all that there is. He used the phrase other worlds at times but was careful about his use of the term, lest Castaneda think that Don Juan was talking about extraterrestrials. Footnote 3. The subject never came up between the two men, so it's safe to say that Don Juan didn't express an opinion on the subject of life existing on other planets. Confusing the issue somewhat is that Don Juan often used the term world, or whatever was translated as world, in referring to what we would normally refer to as the universe. He does speak of, and Castaneda experienced at least one that he wrote about, other worlds that can be perceived. One is not necessarily gone to any other planet, but at the same time one is not physically present in this world at the same time one is there. Perhaps the word realm in that context might have been a better choice than world. He was more speaking about the fact that there are things, here with us every moment, but which are separated from us by massive perceptual barriers, the doing of the tonal designed to keep us safe. And it is not just our sanity that the tonal is protecting in this case. What we are incapable of perceiving is often injurious to us, and potentially fatal, if we were to break that barrier and perceive it. Thus, a Nagual must have no points of leakage from his luminous body. This will enable him to have the necessary speed and strength to deal with the unknown and live to tell about it.
2. Tell us other people, or, tell us how we react to other people. Much of what causes us to leak energy results from our interactions with others. In Chapter 6 we discussed what Don Juan called the mercantile mentality and how it can warp our self-perception. It also warps how we view our fellow human beings. If every emotional situation is a transaction, to be tallied and evaluated for winning and losing, we have then consigned them into the category of assets and liabilities, and it's not hard to see that such a manner of considering other people can lead nowhere good. When we deal with other people, We exchange tiny parts of our luminosity with them. Don Juan says that other people shoot their fibers into us, and that these foreign fibers lodge in our luminous body. The implication is that fibers resulting from negative interactions cost us more energy, but that there is some leakage created by the presence of any foreign fibers. Footnote 4. There is, not surprisingly, a regimented process for removing these foreign fibers. It will be discussed in detail in a later chapter, so it becomes exceedingly important to limit the opportunity for our luminous bodies to get polluted with foreign fibers. To this end, Don Juan introduced additional techniques to Castaneda, without overtly discussing the underlying reasons.
3. Disrupting routines. Don Juan discussed how human beings easily fall into routines. He illustrated this by rather comically imposing routines on his and Castaneda's time together, doing things like simulating the blowing of a whistle to indicate when to stop working and take a break, when to eat, when to return to work, and so on. Castaneda fell easily into these routines and didn't think anything at all was amiss until Don Juan pointed out that he was simulating daily routines to make a point. Don Juan's more direct lesson on this point was less personal but more powerful. One time when they were in the desert, hunting, Castaneda captured an animal in one of his traps. Before releasing it, Don Juan explained that a human was able to trap an animal because the animal has highly predictable routines that a skillful hunter could easily learn, enabling the hunter to know the best places and times to lay his or her traps. For humans, he went on to explain, it is no different. Death is the hunter, our routines tie us down, bind us to places and people and things, making us fatter, easier targets. And our fellow human beings are, knowingly or not, hunting us too. Falling into routines creates expectations, not only in us, but in those around us. We are expected to be in place X at time Y so that we can do Z, A, B, and C, and so on. For Castaneda, the assignment to disrupt routines was difficult and distasteful. Difficult because he was very much used to university and city life, where things happen at prescribed times, day after day. To not follow some of those routines would make his work extremely difficult, if not impossible. The distasteful part was that Castaneda came to realize that his routines were a great comfort to him. They gave his life structure and predictability, and allowed him to be able to segregate his day into what had to be done and what might be accomplished over and above the mandatory. Castaneda's routines were, in large part, something that enabled his success and which created emotional and intellectual comfort. In fact, he said to Don Juan that he felt that he needed more healthy routines in his life. To dispense with routines, in Castaneda's mind, was to invite chaos and failure. Even what seem like small moves to restructure the tonal are complex, difficult affairs, with far-reaching behavioral effects. These difficulties and effects could be seen as proof that real progress is being made.
Chapter 7.1, Corrections and Clarifications. This is not intended to be a scholarly work. Up to this point I've based everything on my recollection of Castaneda's books, which over the years I'd estimate I've read at least 20 times each. Despite that, I've remembered some things incorrectly. 1. The story of the shibboleth. I had Don Juan telling the classic version of the story, that is, the guard forgets the word, asks the young man to pronounce a different word which of course he can't pronounce correctly, and the young man is instantly killed. In fact, what Don Juan's twist on the story was that the young man can tell that the guard has forgotten the test word, so he immediately confesses that he's from the enemy group and had practiced the standard word for 6 months. The ending, of course, is the same. The young man is summarily executed. I also mischaracterized Castaneda's reaction to the story. I had remembered Castaneda having had his more or less usual pissy reaction to this kind of event. He writes about having enjoyed the story, the twist Don Juan put on it, The sudden change on Castaneda's part from mild interest to truly caring about the ending, and even being tweaked about the 6 months aspect. The way Don Juan twisted the ending was apropos. I'd forgotten that this story immediately was preceded by Castaneda having confessed to Don Juan that he had lied in their first meeting about knowing a lot about peyote, when in fact he knew next to nothing about it. In Don Juan's telling, the setting is described as a kingdom, with no reference to the biblical setting. In reading over my description of the event, I made it sound as though Don Juan told the story in the biblical context, which he did not. One last note. Castaneda relates the story to Jews and Nazis, either not knowing or not mentioning the origin of the story in the Book of Judges in the Old Testament. It's unlikely Castaneda didn't know this, but the standard telling of the popular version, where the guard has forgotten the word, is not in the Bible. Whether such a test was ever used under the rule of the Nazis and whether someone was killed because the guard forgot the word, I have no idea. 2. I gave the impression that Don Juan concealed the existence of the Nahual from Castaneda. This would have been impossible, per se. What was concealed was the memory of the times Don Juan pushed Castaneda into heightened awareness. This was not a purposeful concealment, but rather, as explained, a property of the state of heightened awareness. One can focus with incredible intensity, at the cost of having no memory what was done or said after having returned to normal awareness. Terminology is the culprit here to some degree. Castaneda doesn't mention the terms tonal and Nahual until midway through his 4th book. Prior to that he referred to states of non-ordinary reality. Thankfully that mouthful was replaced by the word Nahual, but that connection isn't directly clear at first. I also implied that one cannot perform normal physical activities, such as talking, eating, etc., while in heightened awareness. This is not correct. I conflated 2 separate concepts in my thoughts. There is a state in which one cannot do any normal bodily activities, far removed from the present discussion, that will be covered in a later video. 3. I've struggled with the notion that the way in which I'm presenting the material isn't the most conducive to understanding. As I alluded to in a recent video, the interdependent nature of the material makes one want to be able to write about several things at once. By way of explanation, the only solution that works for me is this series of videos, a single-threaded, hopefully, clear explanation, interpretation of one small piece at a time, followed by another, and another, etc., arranged in a way that makes sense to me. If at the end it all makes sense, then I for one will be ahead of where I am now. I can only hope that the listener will find the underlying logic if not compelling, then at least easy enough to follow. 4. Castaneda used multiple terms, I assume following Don Juan's lead, to describe things that were often the same, but not necessarily always exactly the same. This can lead to confusion. I do my best to be as specific as possible in differentiating when applicable. This potential for confusion will become greater, not less, as I progress, since there will be more terms, more players, more possible outcomes, etc. 5. As different times Castaneda says or implies that Don Juan did, and did not, speak English. Very early on it's stated that Don Juan did not know English. It's possible that at such an early juncture Don Juan hadn't yet revealed a fluency in English. It's possible that Castaneda was deliberately dissembling, although it's hard to see any practical reason for doing so. Don Juan was living in Arizona at the time he and Castaneda met. I'm going on the premise that Don Juan did speak both English and Spanish fluently, and in either case it has no substantive effect on what I'm trying to do here.